I'm an alcoholic and have been in recovery for 12 years.
I was in sexual addiction for 16 years, from the age of 13 to 36 when I got into recovery.
I was a distinguished state trooper who went to prison for 10 years.
So I was a type A personality type of guy, owned and sold several businesses, climbed high mountains all over the world, skied to the North Pole, but found myself years later twice divorced, bankrupt, and living in my vehicle for 5 years.
For much of my life, I was ashamed of my story, how God had written my story, and it took an 8-year prison sentence to actually learn how to run to my story.
I've told the short version of my story easily 100 and sometimes, which I say is the first step. And that's probably a 6 to 7 minute synopsis of how I was powerless over alcohol and my life becoming manageable.
The first time I told my story was over 10 years ago, and what I found from telling my story was that not only did it bring some healing to other people, but it actually healed me to share my story.
It was only until I learned how to tell my story that I unlocked something greater. I was actually able to find healing.
I tell my story so that others can have hope, that this doesn't have to be the end for them, that they can get out of this and be free from this. Sexual addiction or any kind of addiction doesn't have to define who they are.
So I think the greatest tragedy that we have as humans is an untold story. There's just something tragic about a person living their whole life and never having the opportunity from start to finish to be able to tell their story to another human and have their humanity be embraced in such a way that healing can occur.
Most men, generally, we keep things inside to ourselves, and we're not used to getting out and sharing these things, and we want to be in a safe space where we can share things, especially deep things or troubling things from our past. And so Base Camp has become a safe haven, a safe space where men can share their stories.
These type of things, whether they're story retreats or base camps or these story-centered events that are Christ-centered, have a way of allowing a man to own his story. And when he owns his story, he's able to offer his story. And when he can offer his story, he gets his strength back.
It's important to go through your own story so that you can find where you need to get healing and where you can have an opportunity to find freedom from those wounds of your past that are hanging on to you, that you don't even know necessarily are uncovered until you start working through the journey of your story. And by doing that, then you find healing, you find that there's community, you find that you're not alone and isolated.
We never really get our strength back as men if we don't have the skills to interpret our story correctly, if we can't see the bigger story that's happening. And oftentimes when we go to a movie, we read a book, we hear another man's story, we're always, whether we're cognitive of this or not, we're always looking for a way to interpret our own lives, and we do that by listening, watching, and hearing another man's story.
I think learning to tell your story is such a key, for me it's a key part of the grace and redemption side of what Base Camp is. It's one thing to listen to the story. There's things, when I hear other people's story I relate to, but actually doing the work of putting it on paper and actually telling it, that's where I really discovered a lot about myself, about my childhood, about my marriage, about other things that affected me besides just the alcoholism.
You're going to stumble into your purpose. I don't know how it works, but pain diabolically and divinely encrypts your purpose. If you find your pain, you find your purpose. If you run from your pain, you're running from your purpose. And ultimately, you're running from your story, which is how the gospel is communicated to people. It's through changed lives. Most notably, what Jesus did for us on the cross.